Okay, so the purpose of these exploration episodes is for us to choose a topic and not claim to be an expert on that topic, but rather to say, man, we're going to get an hour further on this topic of discussion, maybe, and hopefully get a little bit more understanding, get a little bit wiser on the thing that we feel like is valuable for leaders, regardless of the stage or space that they lead in. And we've actually done one of these episodes before, and it was so cool to see the feedback on it. And I think you and I got a lot of value from it. And we also heard people talking about it after the fact. So we said, man, let's do that again. And that's really just extracting a few proverbs from the book of Proverbs and saying we're going to treat these as hard candy, wisdom hard candy, that, man, hard candy, if you try to crunch on it, what Tim Keller says is you're going to break a tooth probably. However, if you suck on it, if you allow the wisdom to come out of it, oftentimes it can change your paradigm for looking at life, leadership, business, following Jesus altogether. And so that's really the goal of this episode is we each chose 3. We'll see if we get to all 6 or not. And we're just going to park on these and have genuine discussion about questions that we're legitimately interested in with regard to these statements about how the world works. And so with that, how about you start with number 1? What's the first one you chose?
Cool. So the first one I had was Proverbs 14:4, where there are no oxen, the feeding trough is empty, but an abundant harvest comes through the strength of an ox.
So obviously this is a conversation about animals is what we're about to talk about.
Yeah.
Animal hygiene, things like
definitely.
that.
No, I think the thing that stands out to me the most with this, and I think this really weighs into one of our core values of strength is for service, is that the oxen's work not only feeds themselves, but it feeds those around them, right? If there are no oxen, the feeding trough is empty. So not only is there no food for the village or, whatever particular setting this is written in, but there's also no food for themselves. And so just that idea of operating out of abundance, operating from strength and using that strength to not only serve yourself, but serve others is really impactful.
Yeah. And so in some ways it's like it should motivate abundance in some ways. Is that what you're saying there?
I think so. Or having the posture of, if you're working to serve others or working to feed others, I think intuitively, like you will end up feeding yourself in the process.
What do you make of where there are no oxen, the manger is clean? Like, first of all, is that what your translation says? Or?
Well, mine's CSV. So it says, where there are no oxen, the feeding trough is empty. So, I mean, same thing, manger, feeding trough.
I was just asking, what do you make of that? Because for me, it doesn't say empty. It says clean, which is interesting because, it might not actually mean this. But when I think of like it's clean, it's like, what's a life without any problems? It's like you don't have anyone working for you, anything doing anything, right? When you have nothing, there's no problem. It's all clean, but you don't have anything, right? And in some ways, it's like, if we use that translation, right, which this is ESV, it's like the minute you start to bring on resources or workers or things like that, things start to get a little bit more messy. And maybe it's in some ways setting expectations for that.
Yeah, I guess in the context of growing, how do you think that this proverb speaks to scaling impact?
Well, it's interesting. I'm reading right now. I pulled up, it's Ellicott's commentary for English readers is what this is. So they focus on where no oxen are, the crib is clean, a proverbs which may be taken in various ways. Some have seen it as an exhortation to kindness towards animals in consideration of their great usefulness.
All right, so literal interpretation.
I mean, it's actually pretty amazing. Like there's other proverbs too that highlight the importance of taking care of your beast, right? Like don't hurt the thing that is actually helping you, and
don't bite the hand that feeds you.
Exactly. And that principle transcends, whether or not you own oxen or not, right? Others interpret it as the idea that labor has a disagreeable aspect, but also brings its reward, whether material prosperity or more enduring reward. So I think what that's highlighting is almost like the more you have, the more problems you have as well. And if you're going to, grow in your career, right? Why do leaders get paid more on an org chart? Because they have bigger problems to deal with, right? And the minute you get rid of all the problems, you actually get rid of all the work as well. And so I think that is a piece of wisdom that could be drawn out of this is like, You don't get to say, man, I just want a lot of oxen, but I don't want any mess. It's like, if you're asking for oxen, you're asking for a mess.
Yeah.
And the two go hand in hand.
With that, the idea that like if there are more oxen, the harvest will be also more abundant, but there'll also be a greater mess involved, right?
Yeah, that's right. And the two go hand in hand, like more abundance, more mess in some ways.
Mo money, mo problems.
That's actually the Ben Lloyd translation of Proverbs 14:4.
Yeah, I guess, is this proverb alluding to problems though? Like what's being said in this proverb that spins it that direction? Because the second line says an abundant harvest comes through the strength of an ox.
I guess the way I take that is you have these resources that have been given to you to generate more resources. And like that is their gift. And in some ways, one of the implications of the first verse is that like, but with that gift that you've been given comes responsibility and stewardship. And so a mess in itself might not be a horrible issue. A mess that no one takes responsibility for is probably a tremendous issue. And so in some ways, if I'm taking on more oxen, I'm going to create more mess, which means I need to have more systems to properly steward and clean and maintain that which I've been given. And so there's an embedded principle in here that we used to say a lot, and we still do say quite a lot with our coaching clients. Zach on our team kind of popularized this in the Path for Growth community. It's everything requires maintenance. And so a lot of times we see the oxen and we're like, I want that. Give me a bunch of oxen, because we don't even see really the oxen. We see the harvest. We say, I want that. Okay, well, that harvest requires oxen, and those oxen require maintenance. And the reason why they require maintenance is because they create a mess, right? And so let's make the parallel very clear. So we see the harvest. We see business owners taking big, like owners' distributions from their business because they own the business as an asset. They've got a team that is hyper engaged, right? They have a high degree of freedom in their schedule, right? This is all the harvest of owning a business. What do they not see? They don't see all the behind the scenes work that goes into creating those results, right? The systems, the tough conversations, the nights spent by yourself where you're laying out the plan for that business, right? That's the oxen in some ways. And then we don't also see, man, anytime you have a group of people that is working on anything, there will always be challenges, disagreements, conflict, and whose job is it to deal with that, to swoop in and help at least mediate that? That's going to be the leader's job. And so we've had this conversation before, but if you want the harvest without the hassle, maybe would be the evangelical preacher's way of putting it. Like, you can't have the harvest without the hassle is what I would say.
Yeah. The other thought too that comes to mind on that, and like rebuke me if this is taking it farther than maybe in this context the proverb is intended, but like the strength of an ox, an abundant harvest comes through the strength of an ox. An empty feeding trough implies that like not only do ox require maintenance, but they require maintenance to be healthy. And like if your team or the things within your business that require maintenance aren't healthy, you're not going to have an abundant harvest, right?
Yeah.
Operating from a position of strength by using your resources well to not only grow, but to feed and take care of the things that are under your stewardship.
Yeah. No rebuke from me.
Cool.
And I'm sure if someone out there has a rebuke for us, they'll let us know. But the term that comes to mind for me as you're saying that is a reinvestment, right? I'm going to feed all these ox, make them really strong, because when I feed them, they're going to generate a harvest. And then I'm going to take all that harvest and hoard it to myself. You fool, right? Like, I'm going to feed all these oxen. They're going to be really strong and they're going to generate a harvest. And then some of that harvest is going to be set aside so that we can purchase more food for the oxen to make them more strong. It's so interesting. He's actually speaking at our upcoming experience in Austin. His name is JP Kruger. He's just a business leader and business owner in Austin that I so deeply respect. He is truly one of the most pragmatic people I've ever met, and just a deeply practical leader. So that's what his talk is going to be focused on. But his company gives away 33% of profit every year to causes not related to the company.
That's wild.
So it's 33% of profit dedicated strictly to generosity, and they give it away. And you talk to him again, he's a pragmatist, and you talk to him and he's like, well, I just read it as like, that's the one place where God says, test me and see if I won't open. And he's like, so I just figured I should probably do that. And he said, and so we started at 10%, then we knocked it up to 12, then we knocked it up to 15, and we kept testing and he kept giving. And what's crazy, one of the things he's going to show at the experience is that lots of people use this term very liberally to not describe what's actually going on. This is absolutely what has gone on at JP's company, hockey stick growth. And like, he's going to show the graph. It's absurd, the amount of growth they've experienced. I would say it's probably related, right? But what's interesting is he said they parked at 33%. And the reason why they parked at 33%, he said, there's a practical reason. Again, practical, he said, because the team got tired of updating the website every time to say like, we give away 20%, we give away 23%. Like, he said, so we said it would be good to have a static number for all of our marketing material that we share that with. But then he said, number two is he said, that was the portion that we have found practically we could continue to make the whole pie bigger. But he said, we started to fear that if we do any more than that, you're now actually shrinking the size of the pie because you're not able to reinvest into the oxen, essentially. And so he gives very generously and reinvest into his business by reinvesting really into his team. And that makes the pie bigger. So that means 33% year over year is growing and growing and growing. But, it would be really actually foolish to say, we're going to up that to 50%. And to have a team that's like, maybe not experiencing the flourishing of the business in the way that their family is growing financially, because you're essentially killing the oxen that are creating the harvest.
Yeah.
Can you draw out a little bit more? So you said you connected to strength is for service. Like, how do you connect it to that value?
I think the second statement really drives it home for me, but an abundant harvest comes through the strength of an ox. And so if there are no oxen or the oxen are weak, the feeding trough is going to be empty. So not only are the people not getting fed at that point, but so are the oxen. Just the idea that feed comes from a crop, which to be grown and tilled and then like harvested requires oxen. So literally, like, it requires that oxen exist and that they're already have strength to then not only feed themselves to remain strong, but then from there to create abundance for who they're serving and what their purpose is, right?
It was at our most recent in-person experience that Mike Valentin, who's just a tremendous mentor of mine, he said leaders often go astray when they don't identify who their key stakeholders are. And we've identified one group of key stakeholders, which is our team members, right? But there's also partners, there's also investors, and then there's also customers, right? Those are all key stakeholders. And then you can think about your life as a leader, like your spouse is a key stakeholder, right? And you probably have other key stakeholders as well. And in some ways, I wouldn't tell them this to their face, but those people are oxen, right? Like in the context of what we're talking about here, right? Like those people are the things that make this thing run is what we're essentially saying. And I would say you should tell them that, right? Tell them like, this thing doesn't exist with you. This thing doesn't happen without you. And so it's actually really helpful to ask the question as a leader, who are my key stakeholders in this season that I need to be attending to, right? And I would make a list of them and then ask like, what is the equivalent of feed for those people? Because those people are the reason why we're experiencing a harvest if we're generating a harvest right now. What does it look like for me to feed those people? And we've talked a lot about, financially in one of the examples that we use. Like we have to make sure that they're financially winning if the company is winning. But also like that's treasure, right? Talent and time. Like how could you use your gifts to serve those people? How could you use your time? I think that's something that I would really encourage leaders on is sometimes the best gift that you could give one of those key stakeholders maybe it's a customer, maybe it's a partner, maybe it's an investor, maybe it's a team member, right? Is not more money. Maybe what you could give them is more time. And if you just spend some quality time with them, they would like be so excited to go bring in a huge or help you bring in a huge harvest. And so just thinking about how we're taking care of the things that God has blessed us with.
Yeah.
Is there anything else on that proverb you'd like to get into before we go to the next one?
I don't think so. I'd love to hear what your first one was.
Well, I'm going to actually go out of order because I also had one in Proverbs 14. So let's do Proverbs 14:23. I'll read my translation and then I'd like to hear yours as well. Proverbs 14:23 in the ESV says, "In all toil there is profit, but mere talk tends only to poverty." So in all toil, that's essentially in all work is how I read that. There's profit. And then, in all talk, or if you only talk, if that's where you stop, it tends only to poverty. The thing that stands out to me about that is all toil, there is profit. There is not a single piece of work in the context of this proverb that if you do it and you do it well, it doesn't lead to profit in some ways. And I think the Bible becomes way more fun if you actually start to trust that it's true. Because if you read that and you're like, what if I actually choose to believe this is true? It changes the way you literally do everything.
Yeah. Yep.
So I'd love to know your initial takeaway from that verse.
Well, I have circled this verse in my Bible, so at least we're on the same page with that. Mine reads, "There is profit in all hard work, but endless talk leads only to poverty." So I guess the idea and the difference there being toil isn't just work, but it implies hard work and hard labor. I was actually just recently speaking with a friend who has made some pretty big decisions when it comes to his career and just pivoting the direction in which he sees that going and making some steps. And he, in submitting his 2-week notice to his current employer, all of these people came to him and they're like, "Man, I wish I could be doing what you're doing. Like, I'm so jealous." And I think that's based on it speaks to, I think, the culture that he's currently in the workplace he's in, but also it's funny because he's making some difficult decisions to step into what he's stepping into, and some hard calls. And those people aren't, and I'm sure that those calls would look different, and maybe the things that they specifically would struggle with in that decision to leave would look different. But they're also we live in a free country. They have the ability to leave the same way that he does. And that idea that in that he'd mentioned, people talk about leaving all the time. People mention making changes or pivoting to a different team or something like that. But ultimately, very few actually make the decision to do that.
What stands out about that particular scenario to me as it relates to this proverb is it's very possible to check into work every single day and your heart's not there. And because your heart's not there, you're probably not toiling. You're probably not doing hard work. You're probably not doing work with your heart in it, asking the question, how do I do my best, right? You're just phoning it in. Right. Dave used to always say, I think when your heart leaves this place, your butt should follow. Right. It's that's a very Dave Ramsey way of saying it, but it's probably true. And why is that in a person's best interest is because if your heart has left the place, if you're not able to do hard work, then it's not going to profit. Right. And even financially, it won't long-term profit, but because it's unsustainable. Right. But you won't get any of the good things that come from hard work done well if you're not doing the hard work well. And so what I wouldn't take this as for, especially younger people listening to this podcast is an excuse to just tap out the minute something gets uncomfortable. I think anytime we experience real discomfort associated with where we're working, we should recognize something has to change. My heart's not in this, so something has to change. And the first thing that you should consider changing is you. Instead of trying to change everything around you, trying to change your career, you're going to bring the same you to a new career. And so if it's a heart problem, that's not going to fix anything, because I think sometimes, and I could be called guilty of this in previous roles and things like that. The issue is that I have demonized hard work. And that's a problem if I've demonized hard work, because hard work is where all the profit comes from.
Yeah. Challenge in general is where character is built, right?
Explain that some.
I mean, I don't believe, and I think it's a biblical concept that we're not meant to live a comfortable life.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you look at, I think we were talking about this even earlier this morning, Hebrews 12, right? What fatherly discipline looks like. And I think so many people's perspectives of what fatherly discipline looks like can sometimes feel punitive based on experience and just what we see represented around us. And the reality is that like a loving father isn't going to give their child a comfortable life. Like a loving father is going to at least introduce some level of friction and challenge to build up their child's character.
Man, as you're saying that, I looked up what the Hebrew word for toil is in Proverbs 14:23, and I need to call Naphtali to ask him about the pronunciation of this, but because he's one of our Orthodox Jewish friends. But it says etzeb, which refers to hard, painful, or grievous labor that yields results or profit, unlike the poverty-inducing idle talk that it's contrasted with. So I actually find that definition really helpful than us just saying hard work, because like it's literally grievous labor. Like it's painful. It literally says painful, right? And I just think that so often we equate profitable life even with no pain. And what this is saying is like that if you engage in something that is hard, painful, or grievous, that will produce some type of profit.
Yeah. This makes me think of rescue swimmer school. And the first week we showed up, I mean, people come in and there's all kinds of sayings people use to keep themselves committing to and pushing through a school like that. And a lot of people come in with a lot of gusto and like, the people are like, oh, I'm only coming out of here by graduating or in a body bag or something ridiculous like that. And it's over the top and it's ridiculous. But the premise is people come into this school speaking very highly of what they think they are going to be able to accomplish and what they want to do. And there was a guy in my class, the very first week, you went into his room in the barracks and he had, I'm not kidding you, I mean hundreds of sticky notes with all kinds of sayings and motivational quotes on them, just lining his wall, his bunk bed, like everything. And like 8 days in, he rang the bell and he left.
Wow.
And it's just that idea of, I mean, you can talk a big game. You can use every inspirational quote in the book and you can say anything, but when push comes to shove, if you're not actually able to apply yourself and face the toil that's in front of you, it leads to failure. It leads to poverty.
One of the resources that I really love to use for conversations like the one we're having is a resource called Tom Constable Notes, which I think he's in Plano, Texas, which, I mean, God bless him, he's in Texas, right? But he, I think, reads through the Bible every year and catalogs and pulls the best of what he reads from multiple commentaries into this PDF resource and pulls it all together. And so it's like this distilled like referencing of a wide variety of commentaries. And this is what he said on Proverbs 4:20-23. The lessons, I think, particularly would be helpful for your friend in Coast Guard school. It says, actually working on a project will produce a quote profit, but only talking about it will yield no profit, but poverty instead. Nehemiah not only had a great vision for the rebuilding of Jerusalem's walls, but he went on to work and brought his vision to pass. The false teachers that Jude warned about were like clouds without water. They promised great things, but failed to deliver them. Visionaries are a dime a dozen. It is those who follow through and go to work to bring their vision to reality that are successful. And so, I mean, I feel like one of the things that this cautions us against is be very, I would say, conservative in your commitments and just get to work. You know, I think a lot of times we try to impress people with our commitments And in reality, I would way rather people be impressed by the results than the commitments themselves, and probably shouldn't making impressing people one of the core driving motives at all.
Yeah. Yeah. In the context of business ownership and leadership, the idea of presenting a really good image and a really inspiring image and casting vision, I think can be so tempting. And like you said, I think oftentimes we want to impress people with what we're supposedly committing to and not necessarily inclined to back that up with the consistency of hard work and toil and commitment.
Mm-hmm. The other thing that stands out that I really wanted to ask you about, because we had breakfast this morning and you were discussing that this has been something that's really showed up for you recently, is in all toil, there is profit. I've heard you use this phrase multiple times in the past few days. Nothing is wasted, right? Like, so I think the two really, really connect. So I'd love for you to double click on that.
Yeah. I mean, I just think if you believe the Bible is true and that God is who he says he is and Jesus is who he says he is, like, we serve a God who is in the business and has committed to restoration and redemption. And I think in that you see themes throughout the Bible and throughout scripture that absolutely nothing is wasted. And oftentimes, anecdotally, in other people's lives, I think, especially when it comes to leadership and a lot of inspirational speakers, it seems like their greatest weakness or their greatest fall or struggle in life turns into the catalyst that is used for God to use them in an impactful way. And I think that just rings true across the board. Yeah, I mean, I look at my own life and like the decision to move back here a year ago. I moved back here back to Arizona from Texas almost a year, almost to the day right now. And I look at my life a year ago and like the really hard calls I had to make to quit my job, to come back to the state of Arizona, to dive back into community here, to take risks with helping my brother launch his business. And I just could never have imagined that I'd be sitting where I am today, only 365 days from now. Mm-hmm. But it's because of the decisions I made at that time when things were really foggy and uncertain, and the commitments I made to, in many ways, the core values and convictions that God has given me, that I can sit here today and say, oh no, I'm experiencing fruit in abundance from those decisions and directly from that season. And even the act of making those decisions and commitments in that season when it was difficult, like God wastes nothing. And like he used those moments to define my character and to grow me.
Yeah, which is so cool, because then I sit down like in my morning prayer time and I'm like, you're telling me that if I stay submitted to God and keep my eyes on glorifying him and just love people in the process, there's nothing that I can do that will not gain profit. It's like, yep. It's like, what? It's literally that simple. What's crazy is it is, if you read it, it's literally that simple. Like, submit everything to God, commit your way to him, and love people in the process of doing that. And there is nothing you will do that will not profit. And let's obviously expand the word profit to like gain above and beyond the activity itself. That's what we're talking about there. But what's crazy is it's so simple that's why we deviate. We get bored. We do different things. But the other thing that I would highlight about what you just talked about from your personal experience is, I think the number one thing that keeps leaders sidelined from the life that they could be living is indecision, right? I don't know what I should do. I don't know what I'm called to do. I don't know what I want to do. Use whatever language you want. And therefore they do nothing. And what's so empowering about this verse is if you do it and you work hard at it and you believe in it, if it's toil, it will gain a profit. And so in some ways, it's kind of saying, it matters, but it doesn't really matter, right? Like, and it's incorrect to get this perspective in our head, I think, that it's like, man, one of these ways is going to be profitable, create gain for others, create abundance, create flourishing. And one of these ways is going to be, I think we picture like literal hell. And it's like, certainly there are good and bad scenarios where that could be the case, but more often than not, it's like, if you can put your heart into it and you can work really hard at it, if you do that, it will generate profit. And that profit could be, hey, I did that for a year and I learned after doing that for a year a bunch of lessons that caused me to get a clearer vision of what I could or should be doing. That's profit, right? Mm-hmm. Or it could be, man, this is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. And I couldn't have known that with certainty without getting a year into it. Mm-hmm. What's sad is a lot of us never choose, and therefore we never get good at anything.
Yeah. I feel like I've heard more than once from successful entrepreneurs, like, oh, everybody knows me for this business, the one that I made $100 million from, but they don't know about the 12 other businesses that I started before starting the one that was successful. And that idea that making the decision to pursue something and working at it, like they would not have been successful in the business that really took off if they hadn't taken the steps to develop the skills and go through the experiences they did in the 12 businesses prior. And I feel like I hear that consistently over and over and over again.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, the business terms for it is deliberate strategy versus emergent strategy. And the best case study I've ever heard on this topic is Honda started bringing motorcycles to the United States to start trying to sell motorcycles here. And it was particularly on the West Coast. It's been a while since I've read this case study, but they brought motorcycles over here and they thought to themselves, like, we need to bring like the equivalent of a Harley over here because we're trying to sell to Americans. And it went horribly, right? Because Americans, like if they're buying a Harley, they're going to buy a Harley. They're not going to buy, Harley culture is not going to be like, oh, but Honda's a little bit cheaper and I hear it's more reliable. It's like, no, dude, these people get that tattooed on their back. Like they are not going to buy a Honda, right? And it was going very poorly, like very poorly, to the point where they were saying, we're going to pull out of the West Coast of the United States because these things just aren't selling. Well, they were literally in process of starting decisions around pulling out of the West Coast. And they had a couple of their workers that they just sent with some little Honda motorbikes to like ride around town and stuff like that. And there had become a lot of interest in the little motorbikes that they were riding around that were the exact opposite of a Harley, to the point where they're like, a lot of people are asking where they can get these. Like, we're literally getting a lot of requests for this. What if we tried selling this? Boom. It went crazy, right? It was not their deliberate strategy. Their deliberate strategy actually sucked, but they would have never gotten to their emergent strategy if they didn't do their deliberate strategy. And so I think that's actually a pretty good example of, it was all toil. They were putting their heart into all of it, and it eventually led to profit.
Yeah. I just love there is profit in all hard work.
That's crazy.
Like,
that is crazy.
The word all is in there. Like, nothing is wasted, right? Mm-hmm. Is there anything else that you want to say to that before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, and this is advice or conviction that I could receive as well. The second half of the verse is mere talk tends only to poverty, right? We can ideate, and ideation conversations are really fun, and we can, talk about what we wish we could do, or talk about the things that could be really cool if we did it, or we could talk about, what our business would do if we started a business. And that talk literally the trajectory of talking only goes towards poverty, right? Means that you have no bread to put on the table is what the message says. What did it say? It says, the Message version says, hard work pays off, mere talk puts no bread on the table. It's like you've never put bread on the table by just talking. Now, Eugene Peterson probably wrote that when podcasts weren't a thing. But even the podcast, though, if we just record a podcast and don't get strategic and intentional, hard work of the head about how to distribute, how to market, how to reach specific customer or things like that. I've done podcasts before where all you do is talk and nothing else. And it doesn't profit.
Yeah. And I think in today's day and age, talk can often look like, and you already alluded to it, we just live in the age of information overload.
Yeah.
And yeah, you could sit down and listen to every podcast out there about training for a race, training for a half or a marathon or something like that. And you can order all the gear and look at it. You can listen to every Huberman lab to optimize your sleep and your diet. But ultimately, like, if you never actually put in the consistent grind of running miles upon miles every week in preparation for it, you're never going to get there.
Yeah. I keep referencing this conversation, so I'm excited to have him on the podcast. But the conversation we had with your brother the other day, who's a business owner, is one of the things he said that I thought was really sharp for his business is he said, man, the minute we actually put something out to the marketplace, the feedback loop exponentially increases, which is so true, right? We can chat about the things that we want to release to the marketplace for literally years on end and not receive any real feedback. The minute you start getting feedback that leads to customer-centric improvement is when you actually put something out there and do something.
Yep.
Right? Okay, we could talk more on this for a very long time. You go with the next one.
Cool. So the next one I had was 18:1.
Okay.
And this is the one I like let out an oof while we were preparing before this. Cause I was like, I've read Proverbs so many times and I feel like every time I read it, there's always one that I'm like, I didn't remember this one being in here. And it just hits me hard for some reason in this season. So
I didn't know which one you were talking about when we were preparing, but now I'm looking it up and I'm pumped to talk about this. This will be great.
Yeah. So Proverbs 18:1, one who isolates himself pursues selfish desires. He rebels against all sound wisdom. And my note that I wrote down was just isolation equals rebellion, which I just never thought to frame it that way, but it makes so much sense. And not only rebellion, but like you're rebelling against all sound wisdom. And Proverbs 1 says like the beginning of knowledge, the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. So it's like you are actively rebelling against submitting to God and his authority by isolating yourself as a leader. And I'm like, man, that hits hard.
Okay, so here's what I'd like to do, because I think sometimes we can use words like rebellion, right? We're trying to overthrow God's will or things like that. And it's like that, but when you're doing it though, that isn't practically what it feels like at all. So I'd love, and I'll share one too, but do you have a practical example of where maybe you've been unwise as it relates to this proverb?
I think in previous seasons, and really even just growing up, like the way that I was wired and the environment I was in, I was really, in my mind, really good at internally processing a lot. So like I wasn't an oral processor. I still am introverted. I think it just looks different, but like I was a pretty introverted kid. And so there was a lot that I just processed through on my own and in my own thinking and through just like rumination that I think I carried that disposition into my adulthood. And I probably carried it farther than I needed to after becoming a Christian and learning what healthy community and accountability looks like. And then having that healthy community and accountability. And then I think that disposition carried farther probably than it should have, like years farther. Because I would always, even in my decision to move to Texas to continue to pursue flight school, like it was a very turbulent time for me. My decision to get out of the Coast Guard, I don't regret any of those decisions. And like I think we've talked about previously, all things are profitable. Yeah. Like nothing is wasted, and the Lord used the difficulties in those pursuits to form me in so many different ways. And so I don't look back with regret at all, but I do look back sometimes and like the nature of where I was when I was living in Oregon and I'm making the decision to get out of the Coast Guard is I didn't have church community. I was isolated. I was in a small town. And so all of the people that could weigh into my life and that I had gotten to know throughout my life were from a distance. And while I think that insight is really valuable, there's only so much that they can really weigh into when I'm the one painting the picture from a point of isolation of like what my life looks like and how I'm thinking through things. And so I look at that decision. I also look at, again, like my time in Texas, and again, another season where I was like a little more isolated. I didn't have as many roots in Houston as I did in Arizona and in other parts. And so I wasn't as well connected and life was busy. And so making decisions from a position of isolation versus just making decisions from a position of strength and being surrounded by wise counsel, I think led to probably some more heartache than there needed to be.
Yeah. I like the way that you took that, because I think so often there's a lot of conversation today around the role of vulnerability and effective leadership. And I think it's critically important. But a lot of times the way we frame content around being vulnerable as a leader is like because that's going to make you more trustworthy to your team. But it's like, that is a side benefit. But in reality, it's also, there are seasons where you are vulnerable. And if anything, it's just humility, like having an accurate viewpoint of yourself to be able to be vulnerable with people, to say like, I actually don't know what to do here. And I think a lot of times leaders isolate because they don't like looking like someone who doesn't know what to do. And so they cut themselves off from people so that the people can continue to have the image of them as someone who knows what to do. And meanwhile, they just like get in their little hole and again, isolate, right?
Yeah.
That's exactly what they do.
And this verse too, I mean, one who isolates himself pursues selfish desires.
Yeah.
And I mean, that idea that you were just speaking into of vulnerability is extreme, or lack of vulnerability is actually extremely prideful, because normally I think it is image based. It's the, what will they think of me? Or I want to look strong. I want to look like I'm acting from a position of strength when I don't feel strong right now. And so fighting against vulnerability and authenticity with the people around you is actually selfish.
Yeah. What am I guarding here? Is in some ways what we should ask. I think about there was probably, year 2, year 3 of the business where I started to experience some stress around some certain decisions. And there were some certain strategies that we were pursuing and going all in on that I was questioning, and I had a lot of questions about, but I didn't know exactly who I could go to. And the way I evaluated, I had a host of mentors that I knew I could talk to. I mean, there's, an abundance of really, really smart business leaders. And I kind of thought about who I could call. And with all of them, I was like, well, they just wouldn't understand. And it was one of two things. They either wouldn't understand the context. Why? Because I hadn't been living in community with them to keep them updated on the context of everything leading up to this decision, right? Which is why community over time, not just in crisis, is so valuable. Yeah. But then the second thing that I think is really important, especially the day and age we live in, is I would say they just wouldn't understand, because I was like, they might, have a little bit of a different theological bent than I do as it relates to this decision, or they might, think about business way differently than I do, or I could think of a number of reasons why they just wouldn't understand why I'm doing the things that I'm doing in this scenario. And they'd probably advise me to take a different course or something like that. And now looking back with a little bit more wisdom, I'd be like, maybe there's a reason they don't understand, right? Yeah. And I think we should be very shrewd and discriminating with the advice we allow ourselves to receive. But the thing that, I look back and I say, man, that was pretty prideful, is, okay, they might have a different theology than you, and you might even disagree with their theology. Just because you get their advice doesn't mean you have to take it. Right. You could just listen and just be like, okay, I respectfully disagree. I didn't even want to hear it. And so what was really going on there is exactly what the proverb says is, oh, you just want to do what you want to do, is what we're talking about here.
My thought is, when I hear, oh, they might differ slightly with me in theology or disposition, I'm like, good. Go talk to those people.
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, that's a great point.
Get some perspective.
And where were you 2 or 3 years? I knew you 2 or 3 years ago, but I wasn't talking to you, right? I was isolating, right? But I have a mentor that he actually says, like, whenever I'm facing a big decision, he's like, I want to call the most like conservative, straight-laced, just protect what you currently have person I know. And then he said, and then I also want to swing to the other side and talk to the most just aggressive, bold visionary that I know. And he said, not because I'm going to necessarily wholesale follow either of them, but because there's probably nuggets of truth in both of them that I'll be able to incorporate into a wise decision that I can believe in. But I think it should be a future podcast of some sort, is gray thinking. I learned about this from a book called The Contrarian's Guide to Leadership that our friend Seth Washesbeck recommended it to me. So did Jim Mullins. And which, don't you love that title? The Contrarian's Guide to I was like, sign me up. That sounds pretty good. But he talks about we so often try to frame things through black and white. Like it's either the visionary way is the right approach or the conservative way is the right approach. And he's like, no, in reality, there's probably things both of those mentors or counselors are saying that is true. And that should be incorporated into a gray decision for how to move forward in some ways. But if you just want to do what you want to do, there's no reason to listen to either of them.
Right. Okay, let's dive in the couple minutes that we have left. Let's dive back into, you said you had some thoughts on the idea of rebellion and rebelling against all sound wisdom.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess what I was saying there is when I was saying, well, they just wouldn't understand. Like, let's be very clear. I did not think I was being unwise or an idiot in that scenario. And I certainly didn't think I was being rebellious in that scenario. I wasn't shaking my fist at God being like, no way. It was just like I was moving really fast. You know, I didn't want to have an hour and a half phone call to catch everyone up on everything I was doing. And I didn't really feel like the decisions that I was making, like any of those individuals that I'm thinking about, would basically fully agree with me. And so I was like, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing and we'll see how it works out. And, you know, it wasn't catastrophic, right? We're still here and things are still going well, but I could have saved myself and others heartache if I had preemptively had some of those discussions. Because what's interesting is I ended up having those discussions. Wisdom always finds a way of working its way back around. Like if you avoid it, because wisdom is always rooted in reality and reality always catches up to you. So I ended up having the conversations. It was just a little bit later and therefore a little bit more money was spent and a little bit more heartache was invested. It's like, man, if I could have just done this earlier, probably could have saved a lot of time, energy, heartache.
Do you think the lesson would have hit as harder though?
Oh gosh. Come on, Ben. This is supposed to be a diagnosis of my issue. I mean, no.
Yeah.
Because the lessons were already readily available to me. And so now I think wisdom now comes in, okay, buddy, you're going to make those mistakes again? We've now identified mistakes that you made. This goes back to our failure episode. Now the question, I feel like, we focus on rate of recovery. I've owned those mistakes and moved forward from them. I've had actually particular conversations with those mentors about the way that I thought about them in that season, how it was incorrect and how I now think about them. And I've taken active steps to, have people that have context on decisions that I'm making. So I'm not like doing it just in crisis. So, and I've received grace for it, right? Praise God for that. Now wisdom is, okay, are we going to do this again? Or when you face similar decisions, am I going to use some version of the phrase they just wouldn't understand? I heard someone recently say, and this is a guy who could say this too. It was Brian Houston. You know who that is? He was the lead pastor at Hillsong, right? That unfortunately, and he would say this, his tenure at Hillsong ended in disgrace, right? He just recently released a 2-part podcast lesson on Humpty Pastor. Humpty Dumpty fell off the wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall and all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty back together again, right? Really great lesson. And, his perspective on that is uniquely valuable, right? Because it's probably one of the most exposed and like widely talked about falls, in our time, right? Is just his fall in people's eyes and what they perceived him to be. One of the things that he said in that was so good, he said, there's good mistakes, there's bad mistakes, and there's tragic mistakes. And good mistakes are ones that other people make that we learn from. Bad mistakes are ones that we have to make, but we learn from. Tragic mistakes are ones that we make, but we never learn from.
Dang.
And there you go. It's like, that's what happens without an abundance of counselors. Like we doom ourselves to tragic mistakes where we keep doing the same thing and nothing different ever happens.
Man, well, we are out of time to
what a brilliant note to
dive into. But I will say, this is our second time doing this. This is, I think, quickly becoming one of my favorite versions of what we're doing here on the podcast. And in the spirit of not living in isolation, like if you're listening to this podcast, this is something that you could and honestly should be doing with the people around you in your daily life. Open up the word, pick a passage. Pick the Proverbs and just talk through them with people. I find it personally edifying. I think Alex would agree.
Oh yeah. And I learn something every time too. And that vulnerability, it's kind of vulnerable to walk into something and be like, I don't really know what we're going to talk about as it relates to oxen and resources. And but you learn something in the uncovering of things. And we live in this time where we have Google and Tom Constable notes, and I don't just trust AI as your source for commentaries, but it's such a powerful time that we can learn so much and grow so much in community.
Yeah. Well, I really enjoyed this conversation and I'm looking forward to more.
Same. Thanks,
cool.
Ben.
Yep.
Hey, y'all, thanks so much for watching. If you want more content like this, we've got some killer stuff planned. So make sure you rate, review, and subscribe. Let's go, let's go, let's go.